What I'd like to talk about is Westerners' habit of externalizing everything and living in a very external way. I have to say maybe objective way, but more like externalizing and focusing everything outward. This is a habit that we have as a culture, as Westerners. It is a habit that really is present in all of samsara, both East and West, but here in the West, because we are a materialistic culture, and because we are a culture of attainment in ways that kind of divorces itself from inner growth, we have this problem even more strongly. And it's a very difficult problem, and it is probably one of the greatest obstacles on the path to Dharma. So here, while His Holiness is present, it's a wonderful thing to be able to examine that and to be able to perhaps modify or change some of our habitual tendencies. For instance, in this case, when we think about His Holiness's presence, we think in our usual way, if we're thinking at all, that His Holiness is there and He's maybe sitting on His throne, or he's here on the premises. And therefore, because He is who He is, and because He brings us these profound teachings, and because we have so much devotion for Him, and it's like having Guru Rinpoche really with us, because of that, we tend to think that there's a blessing that is external, that is outside, that will have an effect on us. And we think like that. That is our perceptual habit. It's not to say that that's really wrong in the sense that human beings perceive things, but perhaps in terms of how we should approach Dharma, although it may not be wrong in the conventional sense, it may not be quite right either. This is an outgrowth of our habitual tendency, our tendency to see everything externalized. Not only the path and the blessings, but most especially and most problematically, we see all events such as karma, cause and effect relationships, particularly the ripening of causes. We see these events as being external events that happen to us. And so our lives, in many ways, have kind of a roller coaster feeling to them, up and down. You know, when things are going badly, and it looks as though a lot of causes are ripening, and it looks as though coming to us are events and obstacles and situations that we have to climb over or move around or work with in some way. Sometimes, or very often I should say, situations like that where difficulties do arise can really take us down. It seems that they have the power to really take us down. And we become fragile and vulnerable. For instance, one of the things that often happens when we approach the path is that just as we begin to engage in something that is very strongly meritorious and growth-producing, something that, a very virtuous kind of activity, as we begin to approach that on approaching the path, meeting with our root guru, taking empowerment for the first time, beginning to practice for the first time, oftentimes because these events are so meritorious, they ripen what's called linking karma at the same time. And so sometimes what will happen is that as these auspicious events begin to mingle with our mind stream, and as we begin to enter into this event in our lives, obstacles will naturally rise. Now it seems like it's the same situation as, for instance, if you are going into a pond that looks very clear and very approachable, a pond of water. And you look at it and think, oh, this is very clean water, this is very good, I'll go right into it. And then as you begin to dive into it and swim around in it, you notice that you kick up the bottom. And it gets a little murkier than you thought it was before. So it's the same kind of thing in a way. That when you stir up samsara, because samsara consists of both fortunate and unfortunate situations of both bliss and unhappiness and suffering, because samsara is mixed, then what happens is when we engage in something that's very profound and very strong and very heavy, weighty, I should say, then in that case, samsara is stirred, and because it is mixed, it is stirred in a mixed way. To use a personal example of that, I actually had an example of that when I began to do Lundro. When I was doing my prostrations, I had to start off being very much out of shape and not being able to do very many prostrations at once. I thought I was really making the big time if I hit 30 at once. So I had to work my way up, and I finally worked my way up to where I could do 1,000 a day. And that was 500 early in the day and 500 late in the day. But even though I was able to complete my prostrations rather quickly, and there was a tremendous good result from that on a spiritual and maybe subtle level, and even on an emotional level, I found great benefit. I did find that it had a mixed result in how it affected me physically. On the one hand, it brought on physical fitness in a sense, but on the other hand, it actually brought up some obstacles. I had trouble with my legs and trouble with my knees, and I actually even later on stirred up some problem in my veins where I got a blood clot. All of which passed nicely, and I'm fine now. And also I find that once the obstacles cleared, my physical health was actually purified by doing the 100,000 prostrations. So the result was good, but even there I had the experience of having something stirred up, which was part of what needed to be purified. Too many students, when that happens, begin to think, oh, now I have to back off. Now this is happening to me. I can't practice very much because, first of all, I'm not in very good shape, and it's hard to get up to speed. And then when you can get up to speed, if there is any kind of obstacle at all, our first response is to back off from that thing that's happening out there. In other words, we don't really recognize, we have no understanding or recognition of events that happen as being connected with our own inner mind stream, our own inner consciousness in any way. We don't understand the relationship between cause and effect. We don't understand that when we see something expressed externally, or if we see something in our lives that has changed, altered, modified in any way, that in fact the event that has taken place is an expression of our own mind stream, our own habitual tendency, and our own storehouse of merit, of virtue and non-virtue is also being exposed. If we understood that, we might approach a solution much differently. For instance, I know of a number of practitioners who are younger than I am and stronger than I was at that time, who, when they had some problem with their prostrations or with some other element of their Lundro or practice, just stopped. One person had a problem with their knees and just stopped. And one person had a problem with their lower back and just stopped. And so the idea was that this thing, this knee problem, this back problem, whatever it was, had no relationship to one's mind. It was simply a condition that is there. It's not connected with anything. And that's that. Probably my mother's fault. So we have no sense of connectedness within ourselves. Now, if it happens that strongly and that visibly to where I can describe this scenario to you, and you're able to hear that it's a little silly not to be more aware than that, that these events are actually taking place within one's own mind stream. And after all, we are being exposed to Buddhism. This is what the Buddha has taught. Still, it seems as though we are able to give ourselves permission to just back off and be controlled or stopped by this event. That really shows us how askew our thinking is and how really off the point we are. Well, that's one example, but there are many examples, uncountable examples in our lives. There are many of us who have been acquainted with the Buddha's path for a long time, and we realize that all things are a display of our minds. We realize that all things are, in truth, our nature revealed in different ways. So we hear this, and these are words to us. But still in all, as we move through our lives, we have days when we are affected by what? Anything from weather to in-laws visiting. Anything like that. We have different kinds of events that happen in our lives, from the ordinary, from the mundane to the ridiculous, and from the ordinary to the sublime, and every one of them affects us and takes us down. That being the case, if we are so vulnerable and so fragile and so unaware of our true nature, unaware of ourselves as spiritual beings, how in the world can we practice? How in the world can we practice deeply? And when we examine ourselves culturally, we find that many of us who approach Dharma for that very reason do not practice so deeply, and we practice it very much like going to church. You know, we might go every Sunday. We even have a Sunday thing here at 11 o'clock. It is so churchy, can you believe it? But we're doing a little dance here. On one hand, we're trying to fit in with the culture that has the habit of going at 11 o'clock on Sunday and making it convenient to keep you guys off the street when the Christians are in church. So we're trying to fit in. I mean, you know, who knows what you could do. You could sleep late. So we try to fit in, but on the other hand, each of us as practitioners has to find a way to disconnect or disable that habit of treating Buddhism so casually. So, if you let me coin a phrase, churchily. As Buddhists, if we fall prey to getting into the habit of maybe being aware somewhat of the liturgical calendar and showing up to temple on, oh, I don't know, the 10 million days, that would be smart, wouldn't it? Or coming to the temple on significant days that we are aware of, but perhaps not understanding that the Buddha Dharma is a very subjective process, a very internal process, has literally nothing to do with putting on your Sunday go-to-meeting clothes and going to church, but has everything to do with transforming one's mind, with awakening to the primordial wisdom nature, with eliminating the delusions and poisons in a sequential way, in a determined way, and practicing on such a personal level that the path becomes within us very deep, a life path, something that we live with in the same way that we live with our own heartbeat, and something that we utilize to its fullest expression of being able to transform literally our perception of samsara into the purer perception of bliss. Literally being able to transform samsara to bliss. And that's what the path really is about. And there's no magic mumbo jumbo about it. It's not that, you know, if you eat the right food or I don't know, move your hands in the right way or, do any one thing on the path. It's not to say that if you did any one of those things, it would be sort of magically transformed. But instead, our understanding has to be that the Buddha has taught us there are cause and result relationships that must be honored here. That in order to awaken to our true nature, which each of us has absolutely equally, the thing that has to be done is similar to moving the clouds away from the sun. Watching a whole overcast, really heavy day simply clear and have the sun come forth. So each one of us in our practice has to do something similar to that, to reveal or to awaken to our nature by eliminating our poisons, delusions, our ignorance. Not by building Buddha nature, not by creating Buddha nature. It's not an artistic endeavor. It's not something where if you can do all the mudras right and wear all the right clothes, you'll automatically get it. It's much more subjective and personal than that. And it's much more about knowing oneself, taking responsibility, and attaining a level of self-honesty that is absolutely essential with this path in order for it to really work for us. And as Westerners, we're not really that good in self-honesty. Well, we're kind of moving in that direction some of the times, and I think that for each of us it's individual as well. But culturally speaking, I've said it before and I'll say it again, the name of the game is if you can get away with it, you didn't do it. And that's kind of how it is in our culture. But my idea is that for each and every one of us, there is a degree of internal, focused, how shall I say it? It's almost like an inner posture of calm abiding, but having to do with a pure intention, a determined intention to make one's path really workable and really able to bring back transformation. So in other words, and I've said this before and I'm going to say it again until we all do it, each one of us has the responsibility of examining ourselves on a daily, on a weekly, on a yearly, and on a lifelong basis. And we must ask ourselves from day to day, from week to week, from year to year, are those poisons, delusions, and ignorances being lessened? Are they being pacified? We should be able to determine when we came to the path at first and we first heard about compassion towards all sentient beings. You should be able to determine for yourself how your compassion has increased. To be satisfied that you're practicing a path that has compassion as one of the two eyes of that path isn't enough, because then that path out there has compassion. How are we going to be able to look within ourselves, within our mind streams, and truthfully evaluate, have I grown? This is the very hardest thing to get students to actually dedicate themselves to. It's the very hardest thing. Because everything in our training as a culture teaches us to evaluate our success through how many things we've collected, material things. And even if it's not so much material as it is maybe psychological progress of some sort, like, for instance, power in your life. If we collect enough power, we think we've got it. If we have a couple of cars and they're both in pretty good shape, we've got it. If we can send our kids to college, we've got it. So we evaluate ourselves in that way, and we have lost the habit of a gentler, more subtle, more aware process of looking within us and actually gauging how our inner qualities are developing. Part of losing that capacity, or part of not understanding how to evaluate ourselves in that way, is also to not understand how to appreciate the value of these good qualities when we are able to enhance them. That's part of it. And this is a problem that I have. I really have discovered this about myself, and it's something that I'm working very hard to remedy. For instance, for me, it's very difficult for me to sit back and say, well, now, because of the activity I've engaged in the last year, there's been this progress, that progress, and some other progress. I have a hard time doing that. I just want to go on to the next thing. And so what happens is that there's a kind of dis-ease or fundamental dissatisfaction or inability to weigh out how your practice is. And each and every one of us, as human beings, needs to see progress. We need to see value. We need to understand and be behind ourselves in accomplishing what we are accomplishing now as Dharma practitioners. In fact, if we are unable to see the progress that we have made and rejoice in that, we find ourselves in a state of not only disease, but kind of depression. And inside, on the path, instead of practicing the path joyfully and being able to move forward with the same kind of enthusiasm that we had in the beginning, instead, what we do is we kind of dry up and become dull on the path. Kind of like not as motivated, just feeling dried up. How else to put that? So here is a process that needs to be engaged in, and this process is about reevaluating what is important and what is success. In order to do that, you have to develop two things, and one of them, of course, is self-honesty, but the other one is courage. Because it means that you have to redefine not only yourself, but the education you've got from your culture, maybe from your parents, the information that has been given to you throughout your whole life has to be reevaluated. And supposing, having traveled on the path for a while, we discover that, oh, now it seems to us that we should be a monk or a nun. And in the beginning, that's a very joyful, very exciting process. Because we're strongly motivated, we feel very much in touch with why we should practice like this. We are thinking, oh, now I'm going to put on these robes and I'm going to take the vows, and therefore I will have made some progress. But don't you hear that even there, we're looking externally rather than internally? And in that case, in the worst case scenario that I've just described, if it's really severe, to some people the robes can actually be an obstacle. Pure and perfect as they are. But that should never happen. That should never happen, because these are the Buddha's robes, and this is the Buddha's path. And every opportunity to transform one's life and pacify the poisons is here. So later on, this same ordained person, after they've worn the robes for a while, and they're sort of used to it, and it's not a big deal anymore. There's no more romance about it. The honeymoon is over. at that time, you begin to notice, wow, you know, I'm wearing robes all the time, so I can't really get that executive job I thought I was going to get when I was younger. And I'm wearing robes all the time, so I really can't, I really don't have 2 cars in my garage and, you know, 3-piece suits lining my closets. And you think, oh, you know, I'm wearing robes, and therefore it looks like my life has taken a really different turn. I mean, I thought that with all my education, I would have gone to school, and with all my education, I would have maybe had a degree and gotten a good job and done all the things that I was told was the right way to go. And yet here I am wearing these robes that aren't even considered conventional in our society. Nobody really recognizes them, so I'm wearing these funky clothes, and I have a funky job, and most of my time is spent repeating mantra and saying, doing prayers and saying practices and living this other kind of life that doesn't gather very much. It doesn't gather very much materially. So each one of us that takes that route will have a period of time, guaranteed, will have a period of time where we stop and think, whoa, what's happening here? What have I taken a left turn into the Twilight Zone, or what? What is this? I mean, I remember when I was going to school, I made all these special progress classes, and I skipped a grade, and I was really smart, and everybody told me, oh, you're going to be so smart, you're going to be a lawyer or something. Wow. So, and yet here I am wearing similar funky clothes to you, spending all my time doing this Dharma activity, and, you know, not really that much in the material collecting sense to show for it, except that we've made a beautiful temple. So, at some point, you have to stop and reevaluate yourself and determine for yourself whether you are satisfied that you are engaging in the path in such a way as to bring about the actual result that you want. What is the actual result that you want? Well, that's based on the Buddha's teaching. This is the Buddha Dharma. This is the path that the Buddha has taught. And the Buddha never said, if you have a nice car, you will attain realization. To my knowledge, never. And the Buddha never said, if you have a really nice house and a really big screen TV, which, by the way, I'm buying one, then you will attain realization. So none of those things are true, but the Buddha did say that the point of practicing the path is to transform all of one's poisons: hatred, anger, greed, ignorance, arrogance, competitiveness, lust, all of these kinds of qualities, to transform them into pure qualities, such as the qualities of wisdom and compassion. So, in one way, you could say that on the path you are gathering certain things, because you do gather information. You do gather information as to how to say prayers and how to do your puja and how to engage in the specifics of the path. You do learn how to perform mudra. You do learn how to make offerings. You do learn how to set up an altar. So it's not as though you're not gathering information. But the thing that has to be somewhat changed here, that has to be somewhat different here, is that you have to recognize the distinction between gathering things and actually growing and becoming and purifying and giving rise to the necessary characteristics in order to attain realization. And the Buddha describes how to do that. We have a whole process that we are supposed to go through, beginning with realizing the preciousness of this human rebirth and the faults of cyclic existence, and from that point beginning to turn the mind in such a way, and this is a very important process that the beginners are all becoming aware with, I hope, aware of, to transform our ordinary life into the path and the result itself. And we have to transform all of our unfortunate qualities, our non-virtuous qualities, our poisons, into those which are like the nature that is our nature. And this process is not a superficial process. It isn't an axe-like process, meaning, and everybody knits their eyebrows, what's that mean? Well, here's what it means. It means that if it acts like a Dharma practitioner, it isn't necessarily a Dharma practitioner. And I've seen that, I'm sure you've seen that way too many times. To act like a Dharma practitioner on the external level is not necessarily the same as being a Dharma practitioner on the internal level. So we have to be able to be subjective enough, subtle, honest, willing, courageous, in order to really determine for ourselves how much time are we putting into this path of Buddhism, and are we getting a result that is equal to the time we're putting into it. How is this process going? It's so important to evaluate oneself on a daily, weekly, monthly, yearly basis. And I don't mean to evaluate yourselves in a non-loving, non-productive kind of way. We're not talking about hair shirts here. You know, we're not talking about being stiff and unnatural in your path. We're not talking about saying, ooh, you know, I used to like to watch those action movies, now I can't watch them anymore, so I better not watch them. And then you don't watch the action movies, but inside you have visions of martial arts and things happening, you know. And so there really isn't all that much change. You still, when you're mad at somebody, think about popping them a good one. But you don't watch action movies anymore. So that's charming. So, as Westerners, we have to see the difference. You know, the difference has to be understood. That it's about taking responsibility for the development of pure qualities. And why is that? Because you want to be a good girl or a good boy? No. You want to develop those qualities because those qualities are consistent with the proper result, with attaining the proper result on this path. They are consistent with Buddhahood. And so we are not only willing to experience transformation, we are seeking it out. Now, one way to accomplish this seeking out of opportunities in order to practice in this very subtle and very pure level on the path, very true to oneself way. In order to practice like that, we have to learn how to take in the information surrounding us and utilize it in a beneficial way. You could call that attaining pure, or purifying the view, attaining pure view. You could call that transforming suffering into bliss or ignorance into bliss. It doesn't really matter what you call it. What matters is that you really understand it. And you can begin with pure Dharma situations, for instance, like here at the temple now, we have His Holiness here, and He is conferring blessings on us. He is giving us empowerment. He is giving us transmission and teaching, and the great blessing of His presence. And so think for a minute, how are you taking this? How are you experiencing this very experience? Because this is one experience that you want to milk for everything it's worth. How many times will you get to be in the presence of a living Buddha like that? And if you're asleep at the wheel or doing, your ordinary things, then your experience is going to be ordinary. Remember, the seed and the fruit are consistent with one another. The experience will then be ordinary. So how are you taking the experience of being with His Holiness? For some of us, unfortunately, we simply have not deepened enough to really take hold of this in the best way. And we see it as an external situation. Oh, His Holiness is here, so that means we have to clean up the grounds. Or His Holiness is here, so that means about 3 times His work for all of much work for most of us. And now it means running around and doing this and running around and doing that and making sure everything's just right. It means moving out of your house temporarily so that the monks can live there. It means taking time off of work, maybe losing some money. Any of you had any of those thoughts? I know, we don't want to admit it, and Lord knows I wouldn't press you. But it is something that occurs. We think in terms of these sort of gross external events. Oh, I have to travel here to do that, and then I have to go there, and it interrupts my, it's really worth it, but it does interrupt things, and it's like, I'm going to see him. It's a very external, very superficial approach, if you can hear the difference. There is another way to perceive this experience. If one could cut off that external view, that superficial view, sufficiently to be able to perceive internally and more profoundly what might actually be occurring here, is magnificent. Now, if you think about it, His Holiness Penna Rinpoche, certainly in my view, and I know in the view of many, many others, him having been elected to be the head of all the Nyingmapa, he is considered to be a living Buddha. So in my mind, when he is present here in this place, this is the celestial palace. This is the copper-colored mountain, which is Guru Rinpoche's Pure Land. And in my mind, Guru Rinpoche is in residence. So my effort then would be to remain as non-dual with that event as possible. In other words, to not externalize it, to realize that as His Holiness is here in residence, as he is none other than Guru Rinpoche himself to me, then it is my responsibility to remain with my mind in a non-dual way, practicing that, carefully and deeply so that I experience sameness with him. To practice in such a way as to awaken to that within myself, within each one of us, that is non-dual with the Guru. And so, for me, I try to uphold the experience or the inner vision of this being the Pure Land. Guru Rinpoche is present. All of the disciples also emanate as Guru Rinpoche, pure, having those same wisdom qualities. And so this opportunity then becomes fully endowed, complete, with everything necessary. One can perceive this entire event as happening subtly and profoundly within one's own nature, one's own mind stream. It is possible to practice in such a way that while the Guru is in residence, and there he sits in his house, he is in residence on the lotus throne of my heart. And just as this place can be understood, therefore, as the Celestial Palace Mandala, so can my own inner experience then be like that. And so, under those conditions, there is every opportunity for extraordinary spiritual progress. The difference between a disciple approaching the Guru, especially one of his caliber, just thinking that it's something that you should do, you should go there and see him, an external kind of process, a superficial kind of thing. The experience of that kind of student is much different from the experience of another kind of student who has the capacity to experience much more deeply, the capacity to be more aware of a purer, truer understanding. That student can actually take full advantage of the Lama's capacity to ripen and mature the mind, to empower the mind. Why is it that some empowerments feel stronger than others? Is it because some empowerments are better than others? Is it because some Lamas are better than others? More likely, it is that some of us are there for them and some of us aren't. And if we are practicing in that profound internal way, realizing that in fact we are now sitting on lotus thrones, surrounding Guru Rinpoche as he is in residence, the internal experience, the experience that guides us and teaches us and enables us in our practice is much stronger. And when we receive empowerment, when we receive the blessing, it's like there's a superhighway that makes it entirely possible for that blessing to come in. It's like the connection, if you will. The causes are set up so that the connection between oneself and this experience is much more opened, much more fully endowed, much more profound. That our minds are more like a lotus with its petals open, or a bowl like this, sitting upright, not turned over, not cracked so that the blessing runs out, and not with poison residue in the bottom because we're thinking all the time about stupid things. But instead, we have the beginnings of some kind of inner wisdom. Because the empowerment of the blessing that His Holiness gives us links with, it's like a linking karma or a linking event, links with our capacity to experience deeply and to understand what this blessing actually is. So he then has the Lama then has a greater opportunity. The causes are set up so that there is a greater opportunity to deepen, mature, and ripen the mind stream, which is what the Lama must do. How many of us have taken advantage of that to the best of our ability? Isn't it so that in Dharma situations we often use them as social situations? We get to see our friends again. We get to do lots of work. We get to have all kinds of experiences that we don't normally have. But on what level are we experiencing? This may be the copper-colored mountain. That may be Guru Rinpoche. Certainly feels that way to me. But if we ourselves are having simply an ordinary experience that is kept in the realm of that which is not subtle, but in fact is gross and very material, if we are functioning on that level, it is very difficult for us to have anything but an ordinary experience. It's not to say the blessing isn't there. It's not to say what is holy is not holy. It's still holy. But we as receptacles are not fit. It's like that bowl is turned over and the blessing is simply running off, not able to be held. When we first started practicing the Buddha Dharma, I actually gave instruction that it would be really good if when we listened to teachings we would hold our hands like a bowl. Just in the beginning. We don't do that anymore. We're way too sophisticated for that now. But my idea was that if we held our hands like a bowl, we would put our minds in that position also. That would help us to, it's like almost like a charm, you know? Like a physical reminder to keep ourselves in that inner posture. It's still a very good image to use. It's really important for us to understand that the experiences and opportunities that we have here in this Dharma setting with His Holiness, practicing this path, isn't easy to come by. I mean, it's really hard to come by. First of all, according to the Buddha's teaching, precious human rebirth is extremely difficult to obtain. That this precious human rebirth is short. You don't realize that till right around midlife. Boy, do you realize it then. Midlife is when weeks turn into days, and months turn into weeks, and years turn into months, and I don't even know what happens to days. They turn into hours. And there is a natural kind of awareness that you receive at that time for how precious this actually is. You realize that life is passing quickly. The traditional image that we are given is like a waterfall coming down a mountain. It's an excellent image. Do you know why? Because when you look at a waterfall coming down a mountain, you think, oh, waterfall. Waterfall's been there for 1,000 years. There's always been a waterfall there. You could tell the rocks are all worn down. But if you really think about it, life actually does go down that mountain like a waterfall, because if you took 1 cup of water, or 1 gallon of water, and watched it go down that waterfall, if you could somehow manage to do that, that waterfall may look like it's still there, but that gallon of water is gone, kiddo. It is gone. So while, yes, in some theoretical sense, life moves on, life is, happening, we ourselves, when we begin to move through our lives, begin to understand just how quickly this opportunity passes. So, that is another point that we have to consider when we are trying to deepen ourselves and take a hold of this situation. And then we have to ask ourselves again, honestly and courageously, what are the goals? Are we able to distinguish between the sociological and cultural goals that we were given that are materialistic and very superficial? Are we able to understand that according to the Buddha's teaching, reaching for those goals, they are ordinary. They are within the world. Cars, chicken in every pot, all that stuff that you can have. These are very reachable and they're very much in the world. And since they arise from samsara, what do they result in? More samsara. That's the only thing they can result in. Now we have to ask ourselves, under these conditions, do we have the courage? Are we willing to actually give rise to the causes that produce liberation? In order to do that, one has to practice the path and actually engage in giving rise to the causative events or causative situations that will bring about the result of realization, or will bring about the result of Buddhahood, such as, of course, the eliminating of the poisons, eliminating of hatred, greed, and ignorance, such as accomplishing those elements on the path which bring about merit and virtue, which establish virtue, such as making offering, meditation, prayer, study, contemplation, those kinds of activities. These are the ones that we are taught give rise to the extraordinary result. But in that, we have to be willing not only to create the proper causes, but to be happy with the proper result. We may find that when we examine ourselves, we actually have two programs running, which is unfortunate. One program has to do with the spiritual path, and the other one is our other life, where we still have to go and, conquer things. Or we have to still put up the appearance of engaging in this materialistic kind of solution or progress. So it's a funny little dance that we have to do as Dharma practitioners. And it's one that we need to grow into gradually. But it's extremely important that we orientate ourselves properly in terms of our intention, so that we can take advantage of this opportunity and practice more deeply. So how to understand what actually happens to us when we meet with a teacher like His Holiness? Here we are meeting with the head of our lineage. He's the root guru of your root guru. Therefore, he's Big Daddy. He is therefore also your root guru. And he is extraordinarily realized. He is bringing us empowerment and blessings. How are we to understand what we see when we see this? We can understand that we are meeting with our own mind. We can understand that somehow miraculously and gorgeously within our mind stream rises up the very face of Buddhahood. We can understand that upon meeting with him, we have met our profound nature. We can understand that by having the merit of being able to drink from the cup of his blessing, that we have come to a moment in time and space that we must have worked very hard for. And been very fortunate that the dice rolled just the right way. So it has a real quality of having gone around the merry-go-round for very long, and suddenly you've got the brass ring. In order to take the kinds of vows that many of us are getting ready to take now, we have to have earned that. Within ourselves, we are at an amazing position spiritually where it's like a pivotal point. To take the vows in an external and superficial way and say, oh, from now on I have to dress differently, and from now on I can't lie anymore, and all that kind of stuff, that's kind of ridiculous. Instead, wouldn't it be more potent and wouldn't it be more true to say, now I am taking those vows because I have met with the time within my mind stream where there is the option, the great blessing, the opportunity of being able to almost grab this moment and swing forward at Mach 10 speed. So this moment becomes for us a very pure, very perfect, a cameo moment in our spiritual development, where we can see cause and result ripen beautifully. We really get it. Cause and result have ripened beautifully. Since time out of mind, you have been waiting for the opportunity to practice the path perfectly and speedily and deeply, so that you can attain liberation, so that you can exit the realm of death and rebirth, the realm of suffering. This opportunity has been a long time coming. Now it's here. How amazing. How astonishing. That's the way to view an event like this. With our materialism comes a certain sort of cynicism, you know? Have you ever been in that place yourself or met people that are so cool, they just don't have a response to anything? They're too cool to be moved. So, perhaps we're saying, yeah, I met His Holiness. I met several holinesses. Been looking at stupas, lots of them. Been seeing different things, you know. I took this from this teacher, and that from that teacher, and the other thing from the other teacher, and what have you got there? Zip. Zip. Nothing happening. Nothing much happening. How much better to be the kind of student with open eyes and open heart who can say, I have met one. I have met one who is the very face of my nature. I have met one who is the very sound of the Buddha. I have seen him with my heart. I have felt his blessing. So maybe you don't have a bunch of, a list of names to list, or a list of fancy practices that you've learned. But that student, to my taste, is more clearly a practitioner. I can understand where you would guard yourself and protect yourself from certain experiences in life that are difficult and a hardship, because after all, we are in samsara. But don't use the same methods to approach meeting with an experience like this and with a Lhama like His Holiness. when you meet your teacher, when you are with your root guru, it's not the time to be cool, calm, and collected. It's not the time to be slick. It is the time to be awake and to recognize that the very face that you behold now, that seems to you to be this external person, is in fact bliss itself, and the very arising of the face of Buddhahood within your mind stream. It is not a superficial experience. It is not an easily packaged experience. It is not an experience that we can collect and store and put it up on our trophy shelf. Because if we do that, we might as well remain within the world, materialistic and dull. But instead, to utilize this moment and this time as the nectar that it is, to promise, to understand that at this moment, having met with such a one as he, we have the tremendous opportunity to keep him above the top of our heads, above the crown of our heads constantly, as our guide, as the light of our lives, as the face of our enlightenment. And then every night as we go to sleep, the great blessing of being able to take him from the top of the head and bring him into our heart. And remain every night like that. To be with the Guru always, in a way that never changes, is not impermanent, and brings about the desired result. So this is the opportunity that we have. Tremendous opportunity, unbelievable, unthinkable. What have we done to deserve this? I hope that as you consider this and understand that you can practice this way, that it's okay to have a life-changing experience. In fact, that's why we're on the path. That's what we want. We're supposed to change. That it's okay to be filled with joy. That it's okay to recognize what this is. In fact, if I were you, I would insist on it.